Hey everyone, this is colleentatum. I am so excited for you guys to meet Mayda today. She is joining us from New York, and I don't know, the universe is bringing me a lot of New York people this week, so I think I'm going to have to book a trip. But if it's your first time joining us on Rising Through, we explore the relationship between struggle and success. I believe struggle is actually a requirement in the recipe for success rather than a bump along the road. The more and more journeys that I've taken in my life, that certainly has been the case. And we are really excited to hear about how that has been the case in Mayda's life as well. Mayda, I'm super excited to have you today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm super excited as well to go to the other side of the frontier, of the North American frontier. So thank you for having me as well. Yeah. It's very exciting, and I'm looking forward to our conversation as well. I'm very curious about as well the fact that a struggle is necessary to get to a point of breakthrough, alignment, or whatever. And I would like to think otherwise, but unfortunately, I haven't been able to prove that right. So I'm here.
Yeah, as I get older and have more things happen in my life, I look and I find no matter what religion or guru that you follow, it really all comes back to the same message that the struggles are the things that grow you, right? We can't grow a muscle without actually working the muscle, breaking down the muscle, having a strain against the muscle. And I think the same thing is in our life, right? We're spiritual beings on a worldly experience. And for whatever reason, we're here to learn lessons. And those lessons don't come by us actually living a life that is super smooth and easy. So it's hard because, no one wants to struggle. No one wants to have pain. Certainly I'm a parent. You don't want to see your kids hurt, but then you also know that they need to actually sometimes learn lessons the hard way, right? But hopefully my wish with this podcast is twofold. Is when I was going through lots of struggles, podcast, hearing stories of people that have gone before was really inspiring to me, because knowing that you can struggle, but you can also overcome, that could be a gift to yourself if you learn how to react to it, if you seek out the gifts within inside of that struggle that you've been given. It, there's that saying that it's happening for you, not to you. It's really hard sometimes to figure out why. And, in the moment, it doesn't feel like it's for you. But quite often I find we look back and we say, oh, if that didn't happen, this wouldn't have happened. And this is actually really great. So I had to go through that to get to this, right? So tell me, you're in New York. What was your background before your business that you're in now?
So my background is a bit of a struggle as well. So I grew up in Syria and France, and then my parents left Syria when I was 11 to go to France and live there. So that was in itself a bit of a huge break in my life. It was, I call it my traumas, because it was traumatizing for me as a kid to have to completely change and adapt. But mostly the other part of that defining moment, as you call it, was when I was working in finance. I worked in investment banking, I worked in France, I worked in London, and then in New York. And that was my past. But it was a very important past, obviously, because I relate to it as well. It's who I am today.
Right. I mean, investment banking is something that, I think a lot of people equate with someone being extremely smart, extremely hardworking, and not an easy field. What made you choose that field?
So I'm going to tell you one thing. It's almost like a no choice. When things happen for you, that was the only thing that opened up for me at that time. And the same thing, it was happenstance that I was working in Paris in finance. I was working in sales and trading. And then my boss at that time said, do you want to stay? And I said, well, no, I think I would need to go to London to experience something else. So I put myself in that situation. And then same thing in London, after 3 years, it was like, what can I do? And my husband was also asking me, what do you feel like doing next I was like, oh, I would love to work in New York and live in New York. And then he got transferred and I followed. And then I also had a job here. I think finance for a lot of people in the US, in Canada, and that kind of like Western Northern Hemisphere, but it's also the case in other countries now. It's it's like a path, like a destiny in a way, or fate. I don't know which one, where you go to, you're good in high school, you go to a good Ivy League or proxy Ivy League, you're on the top of this, you can be a lawyer or you can be in finance. So if you don't want this, you take the other, and then all of a sudden, 30 years later, you're like, oh, that's why I did that. So I had a bit of that going on too, yes.
Absolutely, right? I mean, it's very prestigious. The
Mhm.
expectation is there that exactly like you said. I have I have a lot of friends and family that are in the Asian culture, and they'll, their parents are always like, you could be a doctor, a lawyer, or you can be a disgrace. Those are your options.
So in finance, you're a disgrace in some way, okay? But yes, it's a bit that in New York in particular. Well, luckily in New York you have other professions as well, so it creates a bit of an open mind. But for most people, yes, it's like you did this big school, and what is your choice? You go to finance, end of story, and then you end up staying there until something pushes you out of it, if it does.
Right. Right. So let's talk about that for a minute. So what was it like working as an investment banker in finance in that industry? I mean, I think of, kind of like a lawyer. You see all these stories of people sleeping under their desks and bringing sleeping bags, or even when Twitter was doing its changeover, we saw lots of pictures of people sleeping in sleeping bags. One image comes to mind of this gal. She was sleeping in a sleeping bag in the office, going through the transition, and she still lost her job. So it's kind of like, no matter what, it's all in it. You're supposed to work like you have no other life, no other aspirations. Was that kind of what it was like for you?
It felt like it sometimes, not all the time, but most of the times it felt like my whole life revolved around the job. Because again, these are not jobs like you can't go home, it's like, oh, this is my time, personal time. It doesn't exist. There will be something happening and a boss somewhere on earth, because they're all global jobs. And so you go home, but then Asia starts, and and then you go to sleep, and then in the middle of the night Europe starts, especially in the
Right.
job that I was doing. So there is a continuity. The Like a lot of other things, it's about deciding whether it's a choice that you make, or whether it's a golden cage that you are
Mm,
in and you want to break free from. It's like any other job, I'm going to say. It's a personality thing as well. And I think, you mentioned like, oh, well, people who are smart and go there. I think there are smart people everywhere. In particular in finance, there is this kind of a sort of rat race against yourself that you engage. It's never enough. You're always going to have to do better and more, because there will always be somebody who will do better and more than you. So it's never ending in a way. And I think this is when we all have to sit and pause for a second and say, is that really who I am? Is that really what I want in life? Because that in itself is such a pleasing identity. It's very, very, very difficult to break away from. It's a beautiful identity in a place like New York City. What do you do? I work on Wall Street. And then you break up with Wall Street, you divorce, and all of a sudden I'm like, what do you do? Well, I was on Wall Street, and you go back to that. It's a very it's very central to being accepted in society here as well.
yeah. It's
So
so
it's
much a part of
difficult.
your identity, right? I
Yes,
mean, you were saying to me
yes.
before that you would work at 4 a.m. until 9 p.m. Like, I mean, that doesn't, to most of us, sound even realistic. But that was really the environment that you were in. Is that right?
Yes, and it wasn't continuous. Sometimes it was like 4 a.m., then I do something else. So I wake up, I work, I do something else. I used to do this kind of hybrid work-life balance. I used to work from home way before COVID. So for me, it was like integrating everything. So I still had a life. I could still go and have a lunch with a friend. At the same time, I was still on the clock all the time. So I made it work for myself. And there are ways to make it work for yourself, but everybody's different and every environment as well. Not all environments allow that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even myself, right? With the business that I'm in, which is finance related primarily, but
Mhm.
not in the way that you are. I think I have a lot of work-life balance, right? Some people will look at me from the outside and say, oh, that you're working a lot, you're working while you're traveling, you're working while, I was at my son's basketball game yesterday and I was catching up on messages. And I look at it the other way because I think, wow, what a blessing that I can do those things, because so many parents, can't go take their kid to basketball. That's not an option. They can't go on vacation 3, 4, 5 times a year. They have to wait for the 1 week a year when they can go on vacation. Instead, it becomes a lifestyle that, I'm just kind of working it into my everyday life that affords me a lot of freedom. So I really appreciate that. The online nature of what a lot of businesses do these days because of COVID made that a possibility in a new way. And so I think that's sometimes the difference of, being a business owner and being in a job is that there's a balance, right? There's pros and cons to each. In exchange for having more freedom of time, I also might work different hours than, people think is normal. And for me, that really works. But for you, as you were going through that journey, we know now Mayda she's a career coach. She does executive coaching. I mean, certainly sometimes people wake up one day and say, I'm going to do something different. But for you, what was that point what was it, a breaking point? Was it kind of like a peeling away of the onion where you started to say, maybe this isn't actually what I want to be doing for the rest of my life?
Oh, I wish I had that. Well, I've been thinking, changing, but I call Wall Street a game because money can be good. And there is also this idea for me, but also with people I work with and my ex-colleagues as well, is that what do I do outside that? I have no idea. We think that people in Wall Street can do whatever they want. It's not true. There's a lot of mental block about what are really my skills and how can I upskill and go somewhere else. So there's a lot of blockage over there. And for me, certainly, I had no idea what to transition into. The only place was like, okay, I'm going to resign, and so what? So that kind of conversation I carried for a long time inside, because every time it's like, this, I'm done. I'm not dealing with this anymore. But I stayed. And then I started getting sick. And for 2 years, I had a lot of trouble breathing, really for 2 years. And, talked to doctors, and I had asthma, and I was allergic to my cats, and allergic to something else. And every other day I had bronchitis. Every other day there was something to explain, but it was still there. Until one day I collapsed on the street because I just couldn't breathe anymore. I mean, and after a bit of investigation, it so happened that I had an advanced lymphoma, a very advanced lymphoma. And so it wasn't even a breaking point. It was, okay, this happens. Now what? And now what for me is, I will deal with that while I continue dealing with the rest. That's how I am. And so I went through the chemotherapy. I created a system for myself where I could be working except the day of chemotherapy, because it's not easy to have your smartphone and having the kind of toxin, healing toxin, but still in your veins at the same time. Plus, there are some side effects, but I actually did very good. And if everything happened the way, I don't know what kind of planning was going on out there, but I could still be there. But at some point, 2 years later, I realized that I was not able to deal with the stress anymore. My body was not able to self-regulate. I was still getting very angry. Everything was very extreme in everything that I was doing. And in my head, there was a little switch that started talking to me and said, you know what, the second one might not be as pleasant if you continue this way. And in my head, for good or bad, I don't know, but I interpret this as being a second cancer because, you know, the lymphoma are blood cancers and they're kind of can be recurring. And that was something that I was monitored for. And I thought, okay, so maybe it's about time to do something else. And instead of going through planning and what have you, I knew very well that if I went through planning, I would still be there because I'm going to find a way to rationalize why I should stay and have a regular income. And so I just left. And then from there, it was a huge open road to self-discovery, to finding myself, to meeting new people that I would have never met otherwise. And it was something that it was brand new for me, and that opened a lot of doors. It closed doors as well, but the doors that opened were definitely worth taking that risk.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, earlier you said something that I think a lot of people struggle with, no matter what industry they're in, is um, two things, right? The expectations of if you're smart, you go to good school, you do this, and you're on these pathways that people readily accept. Oh, you're a this, you're a that, and then that becomes so much a part of your identity. And I've seen it a lot, right, in different roles, where it becomes really hard to separate our job identity from our person identity. They become so enmeshed. And in a lot of times, the job identity, the career identity overtakes our personal identity. Or we see it in motherhood, we see it in parenting, we see it in a lot of things where it becomes so much of us. It's an easy way for people to connect with who we are, right? When you go to a party, what do you ask? You're like, oh, how many kids do you have? What do you do? Right?
Yes.
And so it becomes really difficult to break out of that, even if we have a desire, or even if we're getting a nudge that maybe we're supposed to do something else, because, you know, not only are we moving away from something that people understand in our society, right? Like you said, having a secure paycheck. Most people are like, are you crazy? You have this great job. You have so much. You have things people would want to have. People are aspiring to be you, and you're going to
Yes.
walk away. This is insane.
Yes.
And then also it's ourself, right? So there's a grieving process of that part of our identity. And because of the nature of a lot of these roles, our actual person identity has been so lost along the way.
Yeah.
And that growth and that ability to take that step. So you just said, I'm done. I know that if if I stay here, or if I try and work it out, I'm going to figure out a way to stay here, rationalize it with myself. So you just said, I'm done, and then went on this self-discovery journey. But I mean, okay, day one, you quit your job. What does day two look like? That first morning when when it was all said and done, what did that first morning look like?
It was, I remember even the first week, or if it's not the first month, I was like checking my phone. There was this, I'm not needed anymore. They're going to call. They are going to call to ask me for this and this. And I was completely lost. I did not know what to do. I was even scared to go outside my apartment. I was like, I don't know what to do with myself. What am I? It was such a big change of, you know, this crazy busy where weekends and days on and holidays, I was always busy doing something. And all of a sudden there's this huge void that was created. And I wasn't used to have a huge void like this. Of course, I did meditation. Of course, I had a spiritual path, and all of this is very nice and how can I say that? An abstract. But when it becomes a real reality, when you are in that place where you have no idea who you are, what you're here to do, how you're going to live without a job, where am I going to get money from? I was lucky because my husband worked. And so I had the, you know, here in the US, we need to think about something as basic as healthcare. And so without it, it's very difficult to make these decisions as well. That's why for some people, I was very privileged to be able to do that. And I thank, you know, the universe for that. It's not that easy. But it was for a whole month. I was literally paralyzed. I was like, I can't go out because if I meet someone I know, what am I going to tell them? That I quit? Who am I? That's a failure. I don't quit. I'm not a quitter. And so there's all of these mental blocks in my head. And I think one of the switching points was I went to see my acupuncturist that I have been seeing for 10 years by then, and who has been a great support. And I said, I quit my job. And she's like, what? And then during discussions, she said, well, you know, there is this coaching school that is also an energy school. Maybe you want to check it. I was like, okay, not really. It took all my sweet time. Then I went there. Then that was point number one. And then I met people there. And all of a sudden it was a very different background for me. And from there, my sister, who's a hypnotherapist in Paris, she said, well, you know, you should try that. It's like, okay, let me check it. It took me another long time to get through that. And from there was a coaching, career life, corporate coaching that she was doing at the same time. My sister does a lot of different things. I was like, okay, so let me check that. And things unfolded in a way, and it's such a perfect way. In hindsight, as you said, right, it was like, oh, okay, now I see the progression, and now I see why I needed to go through all of these kind of sometimes very mentally blocking places where I just couldn't. I couldn't do anything. It was completely blocked. And I used to go and shout at people when I was in banking. It's like, how come you have to give me this right now? The client is waiting, you know, we have to file the paperwork and whatever. And then I was in that place where going to buy bananas was like like an adventure for me. It was really it was a very difficult moment. It was even more difficult than many of the moments that I went through in my life. And at the same time, as you said, it was, I felt like when I started the cancer journey, there were like these little gifts, all these little like boxes on the road. It's like, hey, open me. And then you open and you decide, yes, I like it. No, I don't like it. Or maybe I'm going to keep it for later. And then your journey into finding what to do with yourself was in parallel with who am I exactly. And as you said, I'm spirit. I'm part of spirit. I'm here on a very worldly journey. I was into, you cannot be more grounded than Wall Street, but at the same time, you cannot be more ungrounded as Wall Street can be. And it's like, okay, so what do I do with my life now? And one of the things that happens as well, although my mentally I really hate that, is I don't know. And so I just wake up every morning, and sometimes I have a lot of anxiety, you know, because entrepreneurship is not like every 15 days. It's sometimes you have a good month, and sometimes like, oh no, what's going on? And you have to live through that. It's not always easy, but you know at the same time that you are in that struggle moment where it's a mental struggle, sometimes it's a physical struggle, but you've been through that before. And it's like a Groundhog Day, or like Sisyphus, you know, like pushing that rock on and on. But each time you are in that spiral where you are one step ahead from where you were, or above where you were last time. And if you want to define success that way, then that is a very good definition of success. Like, okay, so I was in that same position of having not a lot of revenues this month, but the last time it happened, I actually was in a very different way, because in the meantime, I grew my business, I did this and this and that. I'm a totally different person. That's success. Or, you know, like few months ago or a year ago, it was very difficult for me to go into a retreat outside New York. Now I do this all the time. And that is success as well. So there was a lot of struggle to get to that point. And it's still very difficult for me to do new things, like everyone. but at the same time, I was like, okay, but what is going to happen to me? Nothing bad, and it's a choice I'm making. So let's go and see what's behind that door. And I can always close it, by the way, so it's all good.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's beautiful. I think you're so exactly right. Is redefining success is really important. Defining success as forward momentum, growth, getting better, this constant pursuit of um, being uncomfortable and seeing what's behind that door, I think is actually mostly what reason we're on earth, right? Wall
Yes.
Street or not Wall Street is not necessarily why we're here. It could be a pathway to that enlightenment, but quite often it's not. And for many people, we get stuck in a path and we're scared to leave it. And that's when it's a problem, right?
Yes.
If it's something that you're on this path and this is truly what you're doing, whatever that path is, and you're waking up each day wanting to continue pursuing that, and that doesn't mean that some days you're going to have good days, bad days, but if overall you're not really sure why you're on the path, but the path is safe and within the society and within something that you can tell friends and family and not feel uncomfortable, and keep everyone else feeling safe, then I think that's the problem, right? It's when you aren't doing something that inside your heart feels right, and yet you keep doing it, right? It's like being in a bad relationship. You're like, well, I'm just glad I have someone. but you
Yes.
keep but you
Yes.
keep going in that relationship, even though probably it's not a healthy place for you to be. But you have to go through the suck of the breakup to get to maybe a better relationship, maybe not. And you have to accept that there's something better out there for you. And that journey is, I think, the part where you figure out really who you are and what you've been placed here for. So for you, that turned into a career coaching business, executive coaching. I feel like just talking to you, you probably do a wonderful job, because who are the best teachers? The people that have been there before, right? And so if someone is thinking, wow, I think maybe I want to change what I'm doing, maybe they're on Wall Street, maybe they're not. How would someone reach out to you? Where's the best place to connect with you if they want to learn more about what you do?
Yes, on social media, I'm on Instagram, Mayda.ke. I'm LinkedIn, Mayda.ke. On email, mayda@maydapodcoaching.com. And you can visit my website, maydapodcoaching.com.
Awesome. Okay, so I'll put the links in the show notes. This will also be on YouTube and things like that, and I'll just kind of put it in the notes there. Someone can reach out. I definitely feel like just talking to you, I mean, you were probably really good at what you did, but just talking to you, and maybe I'm overgeneralizing Wall Street, but I have a hard time imagining you in that role, because there's a warmth and a calmness about you that I don't equate with that role. So I feel like you've been on a big journey. There's been a lot of changes. And certainly, from what I've seen of you, this is probably such a blessing that you went through that. Most people would probably think the cancer was the part that was the trauma and breaking point. But for you, I really feel like it was actually more the waking up on day one, that month process of saying, oh my goodness, who
But
am I?
now,
What do I do next? Because
yes.
my life has been so much of this identity that I lost myself along the way. And certainly, I think that's something that a lot of people have experienced or are experiencing. So your story is incredibly powerful, and we're so grateful that you were able to share with us here today. I'm really excited to keep tabs on what you're doing next. And really thankful that the community here at the podcast of Rising Through gets to connect with you, because I know that if they connect with you in a deeper level, there's probably some incredible lessons there that you can offer them. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for this very enlightening conversation as well. I certainly learned a lot as well talking to you, because there's always something to learn, and there are always nuggets that any conversation will allow as well. So maybe that's also one thing for your audience as well, is that don't discount the small things, because we can learn without struggling, but sometimes we need also the big slap on the face to just
Yeah,
do
I
what
mean, if you
you
can
have
learn
to
with a
do.
baby trauma, then learn that way.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Just do it.
There's always learning. You're so right. And so exactly the goal of this podcast is that maybe people can learn from what we went through and what our guests went through so that they don't have to get to the point that we went through before there's a breakthrough, before they're, having stage 4 cancer and needing to completely change their life. And still they show up for work day after day. Like I feel like the universe was like, Mayda, are you listening at all?
No, and actually, I have almost an anecdote if I have a few minutes.
Yeah.
Is that one day I woke up at 4:30, and then there was the alarm, and I was like, it was in the middle of chemotherapy, and I was like, no, I really cannot. I'm so tired. I really don't want to. And then there was this huge voice in my ear that said, your job is to awaken other people. So wake up. And at that time, the way I interpret it is that wake up, go to work because your job is to go and make sure everybody's doing their jobs. And I was really, really fed up of doing this. And I got very pissed with Spirit. It's like, no, I do this all the time. Enough of that. Of course, now in hindsight, it means something very different. But we don't listen. I certainly don't listen. I still don't listen. I'm still learning. But again, it's a work in progress. It never ends in a good way.
I mean, exactly. How much more clear could it be? But we're glad that you have started to listen because now your gifts are being offered to the rest of us to learn from. So thank you again so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for everything.
Thanks.